I held my father's burning bones in my bare hands when I was 7 years old, and I knew right then that the men in white robes were going to kill me too. You are looking at a faded parchment scrap from Antioch, written in 19 AD. The ink is smeared with real ash. Germanicus was a war hero, a man loved by every soldier in the field. But love makes you a target in Rome. The ruling elite hated him for it. They poisoned him in the dark.
Before we dive into today's investigation, I want to be clear. The stories and theories shared on this channel are part of an alternative history exploration. We're digging into the unexplained, the unsettling, and the what-ifs of our world. Think of this as a journey into the dark side of history, part research, part legend. Watch with an open mind, but remember, this is for narrative and entertainment purposes only.
Little Gaius stood right there, breathing in his dad's burnt flesh, watching the elite pretend to cry. Think about what that does to a kid's brain. It breaks something deep inside. You learn that trust is a quick way to get buried. You realize early that the world is run by monsters wearing fake smiles. Young Gaius grew up fast, nursing a dark, quiet hatred for everyone around him. It's the exact moment a golden child gets warped by deep trauma, just like Norman Osborn watching his legacy slip away. Gaius vowed he would never be weak. He would never let them catch him off guard. He was going to take everything they stole. But the poisoned blood of Germanicus had not even cooled down before young Gaius got a sudden invitation to eat dinner with his father's killer. They dressed me in tiny iron boots and forced me to parade around like a little circus animal while my family was being butchered back home. Look at this old military ledger from the Rhine frontier. The soldiers call him Caligula, meaning little boots. It sounds cute, but it was a trap. The border legions were drunk, angry, and violent. They used this young kid as a political mascot to keep the troops happy. Gaius heard the heavy crunch of iron armor on dirt every single day. He learned a dark lesson on those dusty borders. Human affection is just a show. People only care about you if you put on a mask for them. He put on the tiny uniform like a costume, acting like a sweet little boy to stay alive. Inside, he was stone cold. He watched the crowd carefully, learning how easily people can be controlled if you give them a show. His dad was dead. His mother and brothers were being targeted by political rivals. He was totally alone in a snake pit. Survival meant playing whatever fake character the crowd wanted to see. He survived the rough military camps by hiding behind a cute little prop. But back in the heart of Rome, his entire family was being erased one by one. I spent my teenage years smiling at the man who murdered my mother, knowing if I slipped up for 1 second, I was dead. I have a leaked fragment from a private journal written on the island of Capri. You can hear the salt spray against the jagged sea cliffs and the awful sound of bodies hitting the rocks below. Old Emperor Tiberius lived on this secluded cliffside, totally insane with paranoid fear. He dragged young Caligula there to live with him. Imagine living under the same roof with the guy who starved your brothers and exiled your mother. Tiberius pushed people off those cliffs just for fun. Caligula had to watch the sadism every day. He kept his head down and pretended to be stupid. He smiled at every joke Tiberius made. He swallowed his rage until it turned into pure poison. Like a villain hiding his broken mind behind a calm face, Caligula studied Tiberius. He learned how absolute power breaks a human being. He realized that mercy gets you killed, but sheer terror keeps you safe. He wore a mask of total obedience while his soul rotted away. How long could a teenager watch his whole family die and smile at the murderer before becoming a monster himself? We pressed the thick velvet cushion onto his face until his legs stopped kicking in the dark room. This account comes straight from a palace guard's private notes in 37 AD. Tiberius was 77, lying sick in a dark, suffocating bedchamber. The air smelled like death and stale medicine. The old tyrant stopped breathing, and the court declared him dead. Caligula put on the imperial ring, feeling the rush of ultimate power for the very first time. But then Tiberius suddenly stirred. He opened his eyes and asked for food. Panic hit the room. If Tiberius lived, Caligula was dead for treason. So, Caligula and Macro, the Praetorian Guard chief, took action. They grabbed a heavy velvet pillow and smothered the old man right there in his bed. They held it down until the raspy gasp stopped completely. There was no legal handoff of power. It was just a quick, desperate murder in a quiet room. Caligula walked out of that dark chamber as the absolute ruler of the entire Roman world. The citizens ran into the streets cheering for the tragic orphan boy. They had no idea what kind of creature had grown inside that island fortress. I threw open the treasury gates and burned the secret kill lists in front of thousands of screaming people. Look at this gold coin minted in early 37 AD. It shows a young, handsome face under the bright Roman sun. The people lost their minds with joy when 24-year-old Caligula took over. Thousands of white doves were released into the blue sky. Caligula wanted everyone to love him. He brought back political exiles. He piled secret treason files in the middle of the forum and set them on fire. He spent billions of sesterces on huge gladiatorial games, free food, and wild parties. He was trying to buy the love he never got as an orphan child. He wanted to be Rome's heroic savior, putting on a grand show to hide the deep trauma in his head. He acted like a generous god, giving away free money to the poor. For 6 months, the whole empire thought they were living in a golden age of peace and freedom. They thought the bad times were finally over. For 6 whole months, Rome lived a beautiful dream, until a sudden, burning fever melted the emperor's mind. I woke up soaked in cold sweat, listening to the doctors whisper that my soul had left my body. These are medical logs from the Palatine Palace dated October 37 AD. The sheets were dripping with fever sweat. A dark, mysterious illness slammed into Caligula, putting him into a terrifying delirium. The entire Roman world ground to a halt. People slept on the streets outside the palace, praying to the gods to save his life. They offered their own lives in exchange for his recovery. Inside the dark halls, Caligula was burning up, screaming at voices only he could hear. The extreme heat cooked his brain, breaking the final fragile gears of his sanity. The child trauma, the hidden rage, and the deep paranoia all melted together into something dark. He was hovering right on the edge of death for 7 long days. When his eyes finally snapped open, he looked at his loyal doctors with complete disgust. The traumatized boy who went to bed was gone forever. The fever burned away his humanity, letting the Green Goblin take total control of his mind. The man who stood up from that bed was not Germanicus's sweet son anymore. I stared into the polished bronze at 3 in the morning and saw that love is a lie, but fear lasts forever. I'm holding a quiet report from a palace servant who watched him roam the empty halls at night. After the fever, Caligula could not sleep. He suffered from terrible insomnia, getting maybe 3 hours of rest a night. He paced up and down the massive marble corridors alone in the dark. He stared into polished bronze mirrors, looking at his sunken, bloodshot eyes and pale skin. A dark realization hit him in the quiet of the night. People didn't pray for him because they loved him, they did it because they were scared of chaos. Love is fake and vanishes fast. Fear is real, permanent, and keeps people in line. If he relied on affection, someone would put a knife in his back like they did to his father. If he made them terrified, no one would dare step out of line. The psychological switch flipped completely. He didn't want to be a savior anymore. He wanted to be a nightmare. His very first order after getting out of bed wasn't a new law or a public festival, it was a mandatory suicide. I scratched his name off the registry with an iron tool, and 2 hours later his brain was on his marble floor. This document is an official imperial ledger with deep lines gouged straight through the names. The scratch of the iron tool was a death sentence. Caligula didn't wait around for people to betray him. He hit first. He targeted young Gemellus, his own cousin and co-heir, accusing him of hoping the fever would kill him. He sent guards to force the teenager to run a sword through his own neck. Next was Macro, the guard chief who helped him murder Tiberius and take power. Caligula eliminated anyone who showed too much power, intelligence, or sorrow while he was sick. Paranoid logic took over his brain completely. Everyone was a potential traitor in his eyes. He turned the Praetorian Guard into a personal hit squad, knocking on doors at dawn. The elite realized too late that the young boy they put on the throne was a monster. Once he realized nobody had the guts to stop him, he decided human laws didn't apply to him at all. I made thousands of men walk across the ocean on a road of dirt just to prove I could mock the gods. Look at this old engineering diagram of the Bay of Baiae. Caligula gathered over 3 miles of commercial merchant ships, lined them up, and tied them together across the ocean. He covered the decks with thick dirt and built a real road over the sea. Years earlier, an astrologer claimed Caligula had no more chance of becoming emperor than riding a horse across the bay. Caligula decided to spend millions of state dollars to prove that dead man wrong. He put on the actual armor of Alexander the Great, hopped on his horse, and rode across the ocean on a road of ships. Thousands of torches lit up the night sky as he drank wine and laughed at the ocean waves. It was an insane display of ego, wasting precious state money just to flex on his critics. He showed everyone that reality was whatever he said it was. But as the wild party reached its peak, Caligula gave a sudden, quiet order to his guards. They began pushing hundreds of drunk, cheering onlookers straight into the deep water to drown. I put my sister's face on our money and made it illegal to cry when her heart stopped beating. This is a silver coin from 38 AD, showing his sister Drusilla posed as an immortal goddess. Caligula had a strange, obsessive relationship with his sisters, especially Drusilla. Dark rumors spread through Rome about **st behind closed silk curtains. He was obsessed with keeping his royal bloodline pure, completely isolating his family from the rest of society. He elevated his sisters to sacred status, giving them special seats at games and forcing citizens to swear oaths by them. But in the summer of 38 AD, Drusilla died suddenly from a fever. Caligula lost his remaining grip on reality. He lost his mind with grief. He declared her an official goddess and made it a capital crime for anyone in Rome to cry, wash, or laugh during the mourning period. If you cried, you were executed for insulting a goddess. If you didn't cry, you were executed for not caring about her death. Then, without telling a soul, he shaved his head, put on dark robes, and vanished into the night. I slapped golden leaves over my face, painted my cheeks like a dead woman, and laughed right into the eyes of Jupiter's sacred statue. Look at this bronze plate recovered from the temple of Castor and Pollux. It records how I smashed out the back wall of the temple so my bedroom opened directly into the shrine. I didn't want to be a ruler anymore, I became a living god. I put on silk robes, painted my face with heavy makeup, and sat right between the statues of the twin gods. When citizens came to pray, I made them bow down and kiss my feet instead. I dressed up as Jupiter, Neptune, and Venus, walking the streets of Rome with a golden thunderbolt in my hand. I laughed like a maniac whenever real thunder shook the sky, yelling that I was the one making the noise. It was complete supervillain behavior, totally embracing an altered persona to crush the human spirit. I demanded that every senator address me as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. I forced the highest nobles in Rome to worship me like an almighty creator or die on the spot. But worshipping a living god is absurdly expensive, and my imperial treasury was officially stone cold broke. I walked down into the dark vault beneath the Palatine, kicked the empty iron chests, and realized I needed to hunt human blood for cash. This is a page from an ancient Roman tax audit ledger, and every single line is written in deep red ink. In less than 2 years, I blew through 2.7 billion sesterces on floating bridges, huge parades, and gold leaf cloaks. The money was completely gone. My accountants were trembling in the dark rooms, staring at empty iron safes. My brain didn't go to normal fixes like cut spending or manage the budget. My psychological switch flipped straight into predatory desperation. If the state was broke, I would just take everything the rich citizens owned. I didn't care about economic stability, I cared about immediate cash flow to keep my wild fantasy alive. I looked at the wealthy senators sitting in the council chamber and saw walking bank accounts. I didn't need to raise normal taxes on the poor peasants. I decided to turn the entire Roman aristocracy into a blood-soaked revenue stream. I slammed my auctioneer's hammer onto the wooden desk and sold a dead man's old clothes for a fortune while guards held swords to the buyer's throat. You are looking at a private court transcript from an auction held inside the palace. I made a new law: every wealthy nobleman had to name me as the main heir in his will. The second they signed the paper, I cooked up fake treason charges and had them executed before nightfall. I seized their lands, their gold, and their family homes. Then I opened the palace gates and held mandatory auctions. I put old imperial junk on the table: Tiberius's old cloaks, antique furniture, second-hand props. I forced senators to bid their entire family fortunes on worthless trash. If a senator fell asleep during the bidding, I treated his head nods as higher bids. One old man woke up to find he had just bought 13 old chairs for his entire life savings. If you refused to bid, you were executed for disrespecting the emperor. When these fake auctions still didn't fill the vaults fast enough, I turned my own residence into a high-end brothel. I forced the daughters and wives of Rome's oldest political families to stand behind silk curtains and charge money for their bodies. Look at this small brass token excavated from the Palatine Hill. It was used as payment inside the palace brothel. I converted the grand suites of the imperial house into a public house of ill repute. I dragged the wives, sons, and daughters of high-ranking senators into these rooms. I stood at the front door with an official ledger, collecting the entry fees myself and recording every single coin. I publicly announced the names of the senators whose family members were working inside. This wasn't just about grabbing extra money for the depleted vaults. It was total psychological warfare. I wanted to crush the pride of the elite, break their spirits, and humiliate them so deeply that they could never look me in the eye again. I used sexual degradation to prove that I owned their bodies, their families, and their honor. I wasn't just running a government anymore, I was proving that honor in Rome was officially dead. I poured vintage wine into a gold goblet for a racehorse and told the Senate that my animal had more brains than all of them combined. This is a fragment from a senator's diary detailing an insane imperial banquet. I built an ivory manger, a marble stable, and hired a team of personal servants for my favorite racehorse, Incitatus. I dressed the horse in fine purple blankets and hung expensive pearl necklaces around its neck. I invited high-ranking politicians to dine at the horse's stable, forcing them to toast to the animal's health. People historically claim I was just crazy for planning to make Incitatus a Roman consul. They missed the absolute psychological cruelty of the move. It wasn't random madness, it was a carefully calculated slap in the face to the entire political establishment. I was explicitly telling those corrupt senators that a silent beast was more honest, competent, and useful than any of them. I made them bow down to a horse to show them how low they had fallen. But while I treated my horse like a divine prince, I treated my human subjects like animals in a slaughterhouse. I ate my afternoon lunch next to the arena while an iron saw slowly cut a man's body in half from his groin down to his head. You are staring at an eyewitness record from the Roman Games in 39 AD. Cattle prices skyrocketed, and the palace ran out of cheap meat to feed the wild lions and panthers in the arenas. I didn't waste state funds buying more livestock. I walked down to the local prisons, reviewed the inmate lists, and ordered whole sections of prisoners to be thrown straight to the beasts instead. I didn't even care what crimes they committed, I just needed meat for the show. On quiet afternoon breaks, I had citizens and political enemies dragged to the middle of the sand and sawn in half vertically. I sat a few feet away, sipping cool wine and munching on fresh fruit while the iron blade screeched through human bone. I forced parents to stand right next to the executioners and watch their children die, threatening to murder them if they blinked or looked away. I famously leaned over to a guard and whispered my favorite thought: I wish the Roman people had but a single neck, so I could cut it off in one blow. I ordered thousands of elite legionnaires to draw their swords, scream their war cries, and charge straight into the empty ocean waves. This is a military deployment order recovered from the northern coast of Gaul, dated 40 AD. I marched hundreds of miles to the English Channel, claiming I was going to launch a massive invasion of Britain. The veteran legionnaires stood on the cold, foggy beach staring across the grey water. But my brain experienced a total breakdown of military reality. I didn't order them onto the ships. Instead, I sounded the war trumpets, set up the heavy catapults, and ordered my battle-hardened soldiers to attack the sea. Thousands of confused, terrified men drew their short swords and started wildly stabbing the saltwater waves. They were forced to fight the tide, screaming at the fog like lunatics because they were too scared of me to say no. I stood on a high tower, watching my army wage war against invisible ocean spirits. I officially declared total victory over Neptune, the sea god. Then I forced my soldiers to drop their weapons, bend down in the wet sand, and fill their brass helmets with seashells as war spoils. A sword, the other had a stamp of a dagger. Inside were alphabetical lists of senators, generals, and household servants marked for future murder. I treated death like a basic filing system. I sat with these men at dinner, drank their wine, smiled at their jokes, and patted them on the back while knowing their names were already listed on page 4 of The Dagger. I took sick pleasure in playing the friendly ruler, watching them sweat and shake while trying to guess if they were safe. Nobody was safe. I was filling the pages faster and faster every week, systematically planning the absolute destruction of the entire ruling class. A careless palace servant accidentally stumbled into my study and opened The Sword, and saw his own master's name right at the very top of the hit list. I leaned close to my battle-scarred bodyguard and whispered a filthy, crude insult right into his ear while the whole court laughed. "You are looking at a damaged bronze dagger guard that belonged to Cassius Chaerea, a senior tribune of the Praetorian Guard." Cassius was a tough, battle-hardened war hero who took an iron spear through the throat in battle, giving him a raspy, high-pitched voice. I picked him out as my favorite target for verbal torture. Every single night when he asked for the official military password, I gave him disgusting, crude watchwords designed to mock his manhood. Whenever he reached out to kiss my imperial ring, I made suggestive hand gestures to humiliate him in front of his own troops. The young guard snickered in the corridors behind his back. I thought breaking this old soldier proved my absolute divine power over everyone. I thought he was just a broken dog who would take my abuse forever. I was wrong. I thought making fun of him proved I was a living god, but I had actually handed a sharp blade to a war hero who had absolutely nothing left to lose. I blew out the candle, huddled close to the other conspirators in the dark room, and swore an oath on a stolen blade. "You are looking at a crumbling piece of papyrus found in an imperial freedman's villa. It records the secret meeting held in early 41 AD. The room smelled of wet stone and unwashed wool. High-ranking senators, guards, and palace servants sat together, staring at a single oil lamp. Nobody ate. Nobody drank. Fear was suffocating us. Under my rule, staying loyal didn't save you. Doing everything right still ended with a sword through your ribs. Compliance meant death, and treason meant death, so survival left us with only one logical choice. We realized that my reign wasn't just bad politics, it was an active survival threat to every human being in Rome. The web of conspirators grew to dozens of nervous people. We were all forced to trust each other with our lives. One wrong whisper, one nervous servant, or one slip of the tongue would send every single one of us to the executioner's saw. I watched the black blood of a sacrificial bull spill over the white altar and ignored the priests when they turned pale. This is an official record of the imperial omens recorded in January 41 AD. Rome was thick with superstitious dread. Every single sign warned that my end was near. A sudden bolt of lightning struck the Capitolium in broad daylight, shattering the statues of the ancient gods. An eerie, screeching owl flew straight into the Senate house and refused to leave. When I stood over the sacred altar to perform a state sacrifice, the bull's blood sprayed out black and thick, completely soaking my imperial shoes. The priests trembled in front of me, begging me to stay inside the palace walls. I just laughed in their faces. My psychological ego was way too far gone. I was a living god in my own mind, and gods don't die from mortal weapons. I mocked the omens, convinced I was completely untouchable. On January 24, 41 AD, I stepped into a narrow underground hallway, and the very gods I mocked completely abandoned me. I stepped into the cold, damp shadows of the private tunnel, totally unaware that the men behind me had drawn their short swords. You are looking at a real scanning of the Cryptoporticus, the narrow brick corridor beneath the Palatine Palace. The air down there was cold, smelling of wet earth and burning torch smoke. Returning from the Palatine Games, I broke away from my main German bodyguard unit to check out a troupe of young actors rehearsing in the passage. The long, narrow hallway was a total trap. High brick walls, tight spaces, and no room to run or fight back. The sound of my heavy leather boots echoed off the wet vaulted ceilings. I was alone with a small group of officers. I didn't see the men stepping out from behind the heavy brick pillars. I didn't see the flash of iron reflecting in the dim torchlight. As I stepped deeper into the dark, Cassius Chaereas stepped right out into the middle of the hall, blocking my path. I screamed in terror as 30 iron blades sliced into my flesh, but even while drowning in my own blood, I refused to yield. This is a forensic reconstruction based on ancient historical autopsy notes. Chaereas struck first, yelling, "Recipium. Take this," as he slashed his blade across my throat. The blow didn't kill me. It opened a gash, sending crimson blood spurting onto the brick wall. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, surrounded by terrified conspirators. Years of pent-up horror, fear, and deep humiliation exploded into a wild stabbing frenzy. Over 30 men swarmed my falling body, driving their short swords into my chest, legs, face, and stomach. Iron clashed against iron as they stabbed right through each other to hit me. I curled into a ball on the cold floor, coughing up blood, but my sick ego held on until the very last second. As I lay dying in a massive pool of my own crimson blood, I spat out my famous final words, "I am still alive." I watched steel smash through the imperial cradle, painting the nursery walls in blood to erase my line from the face of the earth. Look at this broken piece of gold jewelry recovered from the private quarters of the Palatine. The conspirators didn't stop once my pulse ended in the tunnel. Bloodlust and raw panic took over the palace. They knew if my family lived, someone would grow up to seek brutal revenge. A group of soldiers sprinted straight to the imperial nursery. They ran their swords through my wife, Caesonia, as she wept over her child. Then, in an act of absolute, sickening horror, a soldier grabbed my tiny baby daughter, Julia Drusilla, by her ankles and smashed her against a cold stone wall. They completely wiped out my bloodline in a single night of uncontrolled butchery. The tyrant was dead, but as night fell over the city, Rome didn't celebrate. Panic hit the streets as the population realized the empire was on the verge of a brutal civil war. I pulled back the thick silk curtain and found a trembling, stuttering man hiding in the dust, praying for his life. You are staring at a drawing from an ancient account describing the immediate hours after my murder. The Praetorian Guard went wild, ransacking the palace halls and looking for anyone connected to the throne. In a dark storage room, a soldier named Gratus saw 2 pale feet sticking out from underneath a heavy wall hanging. He yanked the curtain aside and found my uncle, Claudius, cowering behind the fabric. Claudius was 50 years old, born with a limp and a stutter. He had survived my reign of terror by pretending to be a useless, incompetent half-wit that nobody needed to fear. He dropped to his knees, weeping and begging the soldier not to kill him. But the guards didn't want a republic, they wanted a leader who would pay them off. Instead of stabbing him, the soldiers hoisted him onto their shoulders, carried him to their camp, and declared him emperor. I hit the bronze statue with a heavy iron hammer and watched my face shatter into useless scrap metal. This is an official decree carved onto a damaged marble slab from the Roman Senate, dated late 41 AD. The Senate tried to reclaim power and officially declared a damnatio memoriae, the absolute erasure of my memory from human history. Workers climbed ladders across the empire, swinging heavy hammers to smash my bronze and marble statues into dust. Mints collected millions of gold and silver coins with my face on them, melting them down into raw metal. Stonemasons used iron chisels to gouge my name off public monuments, arches, and official government records. They tried to scrub my 4 years of rule like a bad dream that never happened. They tried to erase my face, my name, and my legacy from the history books. But while they could break the marble, they couldn't erase the terrifying blueprint I had just created for future dictators. I stared through the clear, dark water of Lake Nemi and saw 2 massive floating palaces buried deep in the black mud. Look at these sonar scans and black and white photos of the bottom of Lake Nemi. 12 miles outside Rome, I built 2 gigantic wooden pleasure ships that were basically floating marble palaces. They had running hot water, mosaic floors, heating pipes, and bronze serpent sculptures. They were my private, hidden sanctuaries for decadent escape and dark rituals away from the eyes of the Senate. After my death, both massive ships were deliberately filled with rocks and sunk to the bottom of the lake to hide my madness. They stayed buried in the mud for almost 2,000 years. When Italian dictator Benito Mussolini drained the entire lake in the 1930s, the mud gave up its secret. What they pulled from the bottom confirmed that the wild stories written by ancient historians weren't just lies, they were horrifyingly real. I held the ancient bronze bust up to the light and realized that a traumatized mind with absolute power will always turn into a monster. Look closely at this bronze head of young Gaius. Notice the hollow, sunken eyes, the tight jaw, and the subtle, unnatural asymmetry carved into his forehead. Was Caligula just a born psycho, a victim of severe brain damage from a fever, or a logical product of his environment? When you take a traumatized orphan, murder his entire family, teach him that survival means hiding behind a mask, and then hand him infinite, unchecked power over the human race, the result is completely predictable. The Green Goblin isn't a random comic book fantasy, it's a psychological guarantee. When human trauma meets absolute authority with zero checks and balances, the human mind cracks under the weight. The most unsettling truth about Caligula isn't the wild cruelty he inflicted on Rome. It's how easily any human society can create another monster just like him. I walked through the quiet, sunlit ruins of the underground tunnel today, hearing only the dry wind whistling through red brick. You are looking at modern footage of the empty cryptoporticus on the Palatine Hill. The blood is gone. The screams faded 2,000 years ago. The golden palaces turned to dust, and the empire that thought it would rule the world forever is just a pile of broken rocks for tourists to photograph. Caligula remains history's ultimate dark warning. He is a permanent reminder of what happens when a society gives up its freedom for comfort, only to hand the keys of the world to a broken child wearing a mask of supreme power. The files are closed. The tape ends right here. Because when absolute power meets deep, unhealed trauma, the monster never really stays dead. It just waits in the dark for the next emperor to put on the mask.